And we're back. Hi guys, it's Mrs. Mandrich, and I hope that you just got done having an amazing long weekend with Labor Day. Hey, I also hope that you are getting more and more comfortable with looking at an experiment and trying to pick out the IV and the DV, the independent and dependent variable. Today, we're going to add a couple more parts to our experiment. Hopefully, this is not the first time you've heard of these, but it's definitely something that we practice at the beginning of science every year because we're scientists, so we got to know scientific method, right? Okay, so remember, scientific method is the process that scientists go through to test their idea or their hypothesis to see if it actually works. Science, right? But here is the worksheet for today. So today's worksheet is called Controlled Variables and Control Group. You might be asking yourself, Miss Mandrich, what the heck are those? And I am going to go through that in just a minute here, but I wanted to show you the format of the worksheet so then when you go do your work, you'll know what we're looking at. So for each experiment, we're going to identify the IV and the DV. Then we're going to think of three factors that have to be the same in every trial of the experiment, and those are controlled variables. We'll talk about that. And we have to think of a group that we could compare our results to see if our independent variable really has an effect. And that's something we're going to call a control group, and we're going to learn about it in today's video. But let's look at number one so we can at least get IV and DV. On number one, it says we're doing an experiment to investigate if the amount of fertilizer has an effect on the number of leaves a plant has. Well, you might have noticed I have started to color code your worksheets. You're welcome. And IV is always in yellow, DV is in red. So if I look at this, I can visually see and pick out my IV and DV, but I also want to know why that's it. So I want to see if the amount of fertilizer has an effect on the number of leaves. So first of all, I know the thing that I'm changing is the amount of fertilizer. So for IV, I'm going to put amount of fertilizer. For my DV, oh, Miss Mandrich. Okay, for my DV, what am I going to measure as a result of changing the amount of fertilizer? Well, I'm going to measure the number of leaves. Okay, if you're like me and your brain kind of goes off on little random trails, you might be asking yourself, Miss Mandrich, don't different plants have different amounts of leaves anyway? And guess what? Yes, they do. You're right. And that's why something called controlled variables becomes really important. If I'm going to compare a plant that never really has a lot of leaves, and I'm going to look at another plant that always has a lot of leaves, and I want to talk about the amount of fertilizer, I better use the same kind of plant. And that's actually a controlled variable, is that you keep everything else the same except your independent variable, and we're going to learn about those today. So I'm going to take you over to my presentation here, and I like to talk about controlled variables and control group with an interesting little topic of superstitions. Ooh, okay. If you don't know, a superstition is like a belief or a misconception that people have that if you do one thing, something else is going to happen. Like if you step on a crack, you'll break your mama's back. Or if you break a mirror, you'll have 7 years of bad luck. Is that really science? I don't know. But we can investigate those superstitions scientifically. So today we're going to look at superstitions, but we're going to talk about how that relates to the scientific method because it's a great idea of this idea of experimental and control group. Okay, so here's some common superstitions. Have you ever heard any of these? Like an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Does it? I don't know. If you go swimming right after eating, you'll get a stomach ache. My mom used to say that. If you go outside with your head wet, you'll catch a cold. Breaking a mirror will cause 7 years of bad luck. Okay, can we really know that for sure? Those are things that we've heard over time, and maybe they're true, but as scientists, we would have to prove they were true with the scientific method. So before I go any further, I want to show you this video. First of all, it starts with an adorable cat, but it gives and this guy, but it gives the history of some common superstitions, okay? So why do people believe stuff like those superstitions? Let's check it out.
The origin of the most popular superstitions. Opening an umbrella indoors is bad luck. Opening an umbrella indoors can still be considered dangerous today, but the superstition of bad luck came from the Victorian times. Umbrellas back then were built of wood, baleen, or metal frames, making them a much more heavy and clumsy mechanism. The bulky and sharp spokes were accurately far more dangerous as they sprung open like a large wheel of dull knives. Walking under a ladder. Originating from ancient Egypt, anything shaped like a triangle, such as the pyramids, were considered sacred. This was not limited to the triangle shape a ladder makes when leaning against a wall. Walking through the triangular gap was thought to trap the spirit of the individual within the powerful grasp of the pyramids. 7 years bad luck for breaking a mirror. In ancient Greece, analyzing one's reflection in a bowl of water was done to predict their future. Distortion in the reflection was thought to damage the soul. When mirrors were introduced, the unfixable breaking of a mirror was thought to disrupt a 7-year alternating cycles of health and sickness, thus cursing the individual to 7 years of disaster and grief until the soul can heal. The Black Cat. The Black Cat myth comes from many origins, but earliest sources come from ancient Egypt. Cats were thought to bring luck as well as to take luck away. When King Charles I's lucky pet black cat died, he bemoaned that his luck had left with the cat. The very next day, he was arrested and charged with high treason, causing the belief that all black cats were more unlucky than lucky.
Okay, if you're interested in like superstitions in general, you can go back and finish that video. But it's interesting to me that us little humans over time, we've looked at like maybe some coincidence that happened and thought, oh my gosh, if I do this, then that's going to happen, okay? So again, a superstition is kind of a belief that people have developed over time. Some of them are kind of like a tradition almost. But let's look at how we could look at those scientifically. So if I wanted to know, does an apple a day really keep the doctor away? Or do some people just get sick more and some people get sick less? Well, I could make an experiment to test that. So it says that in order to prove a superstition is really true, you have to prove that the people who do what the superstition says will turn out like the result of the superstition. And you have to prove that people who don't do the superstition will not have what the superstition says. So scientifically, we call the group that does something, that does change the experiment, we call them the experimental group. That's who we're experimenting on. And then we have a group of people just under like normal conditions that we compare them to, and that's the control group. So with my apple a day example, okay, I take a group of the same kind of people, like same age, live in the same area, have the same general health, and I have half of them eat an apple, that's my experimental group, and then half of them not eat an apple, that would be my control group. And then I'm going to compare. Does an apple a day really keep the doctor away? Okay, so here's a little chart for you. In any experiment, we have an independent variable. We know that. We learned that, right? So my independent variable would be whether I eat an apple or whatever the superstition is. Then I'm going to have two groups. The group with the IV is the experimental group. I'm experimenting on them. I want to know, does that IV, that independent variable, have an effect? Then I have a control group, a group without whatever variable I'm going to change, okay? Because otherwise, what if the breaking a mirror gives you 7 years of bad luck? What if that person just is unlucky? What if they just they're accident prone? Okay, that's me, I'm accident prone. But is it really bad luck because I broke a mirror, or is it just that I'm accident prone? So unless we have a group that we do the IV with, that we change, and a group that we do not change, then we can't really tell if our results just happen by coincidence, okay? So here's a hint. Once you know your IV, your independent variable, you can write your control group this way. Okay, the control group is the group without blank, whatever your IV is. So the group that didn't break a mirror, or the group without crossing the path of a cat. Okay, and then you could also say the group with no, like the group with no apples, or the group with no ladders that they walk under, okay? So the control group is the group under normal conditions that you're going to compare with the group that you did change. The other half of this is controlled variables. So what are controlled variables? That's what you might be asking. You can see that I put the word control in red because controlled variables are things that you have to control. Like you have to keep them the same for every trial of the lab to ensure that you don't change the outcome of the experiment. So you have to use these controls. You have to control these factors. Okay, so let's take my apple a day keeps the doctor away. If I take a young, like, college athlete who participates in sports and they eat really healthy, and then I compare them to my grandma who's 87 years old and I'm pretty sure she eats Burger King cheeseburgers every day because they're soft, those would not be the same type of individual. And would I really be testing if an apple a day keeps the doctor away, or is their general health just too different to be able to really tell the difference? So controlled variables are things that have to be the same, okay? You got to keep them in check. So here is an example of some controlled variables, and the great thing is when you're going to write this in a worksheet or in a lab, you just put the word same, okay? So if I'm testing something specific, I want to keep every other factor the same so that I only have one independent variable. So my controlled variables could be things like the same color of light, the same room temperature, the same type of balloon. Depending on what experiment I'm doing, I think of what factors might change my outcome, and I keep all of those the same except the one independent variable that I want to change, okay? So let's try it. Let's pick a superstition. Pick one in your head. I'm going to pick one myself. And I'm going to pick the superstition that if you swim right after you eat, that you'll get sick, okay? So my independent variable is going to be the time that I eat, okay, versus the time I swim. So how long I wait before swimming is my independent variable. My dependent variable, what am I going to measure as a result of that? I want to know if it's true, do you really get sick, okay? So if I swim right after I eat, will I really get sick? Independent variable is how long I wait till I swim, and dependent variable is if I'm going to get sick, okay? So statement of problem and hypothesis, we've done these. We can practice this. What is the effect of my independent variable? Okay, so what is the effect of waiting after I swim to eat on whether or not I'm going to get sick, okay, from swimming too soon? My hypothesis could be if I don't wait to go swimming after I eat, then I will get sick because my food hasn't digested and my body isn't ready to swim. Okay, that's my because. That's something that I think is reasonable. Let's practice those controlled variables in the experimental and control group. Okay, so first of all, I think it's important if we're looking at if I'm going to get sick after I eat and go swimming, I need to look at what type of food I'm eating. Because if I sit there and I eat a whole pizza and then I swim, I'm probably going to get sick. But if I just ate an apple, maybe I won't. So I have to eat the same kind of food. Otherwise, maybe it's just the kind of food that made me sick. I have to do the same kind of swimming. Because if I just get in the pool and doggy paddle a little, that's different than if I go swim a laps and laps in an Olympic pool. So I have to have like the same exercise level, right? And then really it should probably be the same person doing the test. Because maybe I get sick every time I go swimming, but you never get sick when you go swimming. So if we really want to see how much eating has an effect on getting sick when I go swimming, then I have to have the same kind of food, the same kind of pool, the same kind of exercise, the same person or type of person, like age-wise and health-wise, okay? So those are things that I have to keep the same. And what is that called? Controlled variables, yes. Okay, then I have an experimental and a control group. So my experimental group is the group that I want to actually test out this independent variable on, okay? So I'm going to have two groups of people, right? One group is going to eat and then go swimming. The other group is going to not eat and go swimming. And we're going to see whether the eating is what really had an effect, okay? So which one would be my experimental group? The group that does eat, where I did change something? The answer is yes. Or the group where I didn't change anything? My experimental group is the group that I did change. So in the swimming one, it would be the group that did eat before they go swimming. My control group is the group that I'm going to compare them to see if really did that affect how they felt when they went swimming. So my control group would be a group that did not eat and still went swimming. And I would compare if it really did change things. So that's experimental group and control group. Okay. Moving right along, let me get out of this presentation and go back to your worksheet. Okay, we will practice this, so don't worry if you're still kind of figuring out what the heck Miss Mandridge is talking about. We're going to practice it together on your worksheet. Okay, so here is your worksheet for today, controlled variables and control group. We already did our IV and DV. So just to remind us, this experiment is an experiment to investigate if the amount of fertilizer has an effect on the number of leaves a plant has. We said that our IV is the amount of fertilizer because that's what I'm changing. My DV is the number of leaves because I can measure that as a result of changing the amount of fertilizer. So what are some things that I need to keep the same to make sure this isn't just happening because of something else or that it's just not a coincidence? Okay, one thing that I did mention at the beginning of the video is I need the same type of plant because some plants naturally just make more leaves. So how can I know that it's the amount of fertilizer? I better use the same type of plant for every trial of my experiment. Okay, what about the brand of fertilizer? Okay, some fertilizer might be so good and some might not, so I need to use the same brand of fertilizer if I just want to know if the amount of fertilizer is going to change it. And then think about some other stuff that plants just need, right? They need the same amount of sunlight, they need the same amount of water, because if I give some plants water and not other plants, then I'm really looking at the amount of water, not the amount of fertilizer. So they have to have the same amount of water for the plants, okay? So controlled variables, those are pretty easy. You just think about factors that could affect the outcome and just put the word same in front of them. Same type of plant, same brand of fertilizer, okay? Experimental group and control group, notice what color are these highlighted in? Yellow. That means that it's going to include the independent variable. So remember, the experimental group is the group with the independent variable. So this is groups with different amounts of fertilizer. Okay, so I do change the independent variable, so I'm going to change different amounts of fertilizer. And my control group is going to be the group with no fertilizer. Okay, so notice I just took my independent variable, experimental group is the group with it, control group is the group without it. Guys, I hope that that is starting to make sense to you. I want you to try number 2 and number 3 on your own, and you're going to submit this worksheet. Don't forget, I have live sessions every Tuesday and every Thursday, so if you're confused, come and see me in that Zoom meeting at 11 o'clock Tuesday or Thursday, or email me anytime. Okay, have a great day.